This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me, you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the Vancouver Podcast Festival 2019 at the Vancouver Public Library on the West Coast, this is Politicoast. Today is November 8th, 2019. This is actually our 163rd episode. We've been going for over 3 years.
I'm Scott Gallenbaum.
I'm Ian Bushfield, and today we're joined by
Katie-Ellen Humphries.
As she didn't introduce us off the top, my background, I work for a nonprofit. I have a master's in physics.
I work in construction, project management, and engineering.
And you make jokes.
I'm a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
And a woman, which apparently was a requirement.
I've gotten in trouble for manels in the past, and I think it is important to have some diversity of opinion up here.
Yeah, and honestly, I appreciate being that token.
So, Politicoast was basically Scott and I's idea 3 years ago when we looked at the podcast scene and said, no one's talking about BC politics in this format. Let's do it, because we were millennial white males and that's what we do. So here's our podcast, and we're going to talk today about the federal election. But because we've been going for 3 years, that's only possible because we have support. I want to thank our patrons who support us. I think we have about 70 people on there at patreon.com/Politicoast. I want to thank Cortado Productions, who's in the room, who are our new editors that our patrons allow us to pay, which is a huge load off our shoulders. And I want to thank BC Today, which is a newsletter that you can subscribe to get content about British Columbia in the written format in your inbox every morning. But let's talk about the election, because that's why we're here. We're not here for me to plug our sponsors. We've already done a bit of post-election analysis, but I kind of want to retread the ground because it's a live show, because it's a little bit lighter. Scott, what did you actually want to see from this election versus what did we get?
I wanted to see some substance, and we did not get that at all. We got blackface, we got Photoshop straws, but we didn't really talk about a lot of the big, important issues that are facing the country. How to deal with the rise in China, really digging into what does it mean to properly address climate change. None of this happened, and just overall a disappointment.
From the outside, Katie, I know Katie-Ellen, you're not as into politics.
How dare you?
Well, that's
the thing I told him.
Yeah.
It's true.
Were you following the election closely? And, what were you kind of hoping for as a voter?
I would echo your sentiment. I think it did feel very shallow. One thing that I'm on two sides of, at the start of the election, I was incredibly grateful, as I often am, to be Canadian. And the reason is that elections in Canada can only be 5 weeks. Isn't that?
Except for the 2015 one, which Harper called in early August, and so it was a 3-month election.
Oh, yeah.
But, aside from that
way too
blip.
long. That was 70 days, too much.
I have a 3-day memory span, but yes. Yeah, but so 5 weeks, I was like, okay, that's a reasonable amount of time. Until 5 weeks had passed, and then I was like, I don't remember it not being an election.
It was so slow. I was
Right?
on parental leave, but I was sort of keeping up, from changing dirty diapers on my phone, going,
Is there an
wait,
app for that?
The diaper phone? Yeah, there's so many parenting apps. But keeping up with the election, it was just nothing was happening, but it was still dragging on and on until blackface dropped, and then stuff happened.
Something I am not proud of myself about.
Your blackface incident?
No. Is that when those photos came out, I could not help but be impressed by whoever had been sitting on those photos since the last election. Obviously these have been out there for a decade plus, and everyone, they must have known.
Well, Trudeau ran for office, 2008 was his first election?
Right.
It's 10 years where these photos have been out there.
And it wasn't just one incident, right? It wasn't just the couple hundred people who went to the same private school as him, both in faculty and students, but it was also the people at, I think, the summer camp where he did blackface and one other incident, plus all of the others he doesn't remember, which maybe photos don't exist.
Well, that's just it. But so I'm not proud of how fascinated I am by that backstage process part.
And also after the India trip, you think someone would have said, no, maybe this isn't the first time he's gotten a little too enthusiastic with the costuming.
Well, but I think it tells you something about kind of the Canadian media establishment, because it wasn't Canadian media that broke that story. It was Time magazine.
Oh, right.
It was
I see.
some journalist from the big US magazine comes, or, has a connection and hears this rumor and digs it up and does the story. And so there was this kind of meta narrative right after of like, wait, why didn't like the National Post get this? Why didn't the Globe and Mail do this? Why didn't the Toronto Star or even CBC? Why did it take, the outside press to actually
Do you think because culturally we find it's embarrassing because he's our current leader?
I think it more has to do with people don't really dig into politicians' backstories too much in the press here. It takes some opposition research from the parties to really feed it.
Even there, we have this kind of notion of, keep politics out of the bedrooms of the nation from Trudeau Sr., which is a good thing. I don't like politics that's all about individual interpersonal dramas, like who cares what their sex life is. But blackface, I think, does rise to a different level of indiscretion.
I mean, unless you exclusively use it in the bedroom.
Again,
Is
personal.
Is that not fine? No?
So we had that scandal on Trudeau's side, which didn't seem to move the polls. It did give, I think, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP the first opportunity to get some traction, because he comes out and doesn't condemn it directly, because he doesn't need to do that as a racialized leader. He comes out and says, I want to talk not about Trudeau, I want to talk to the kids who see this and feel hurt by it. Mm-hmm. And it was a powerful statement. And I think he managed to really aptly build off that and get some goodwill with Canadians that I guess didn't really translate into much in the end. I mean, he's the most popular leader coming out of the election, but in terms of seats, his caucus was cut in half almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, people vote for a whole bunch of reasons, and I think a lot of the people who ended up voting in the last few days after the advance polls had closed were kind of just grimaced and voted for the Liberals out of a feeling of necessity maybe or something, and being relatable is really important, and Jagmeet Singh does a great job of it, and I think that was one of the problems with a lot of the other politicians running, was there was a lack of authenticity that Jagmeet really has. Problem is that doesn't always translate into votes.
And the other trouble the NDP has always faced has been the strategic voting thing, because the Liberals ran on, if you vote for anyone but us, you're going to get Scheer, and Scheer is Trump. Mm-hmm. And, this fear, they won't do anything on climate. You may not think we're doing enough, but at least we're doing something.
And then Scheer didn't help that by talking about what he'd do with the majority in the final week.
Yeah, the Conservatives ran a really bad campaign. But Scheer is still
almost
leader.
Comically so. Like, even Scheer is like a terrible choice. And they were in a position, they had a lot of leverage, and there was a lot of ill will towards Trudeau, and they had made a lot of missteps and a lot of broken promises.
Yeah, it wasn't quite the empty net that Peter MacKay described it as, but it was pretty close.
And you're now seeing the Conservatives try to hem and haw, like, do we stick with him and, like, maybe he gets better with age? Maybe he's like a wine?
Sure.
Or, maybe he's like a milk. He likes to talk about dairy and just it's going to get sourer and worse.
He does love milk.
The dairy industry is a big thing in Canada.
Which I respect, but I'm still not going to drink a glass of milk as an adult. It's insane. In public.
You have it in your coffee, though, right?
Oh, I mean, no, I live in Vancouver. I don't drink dairy. It's insane. That's also crazy. But I respect it as an industry.
And so the Conservatives are in this tough spot, because if they do dump their leader, we're now in a minority parliament where they could be going right back to the polls. And do you try with someone even less tested and gamble?
How could there possibly be someone less tested?
Well, keep in mind, Maxime Bernier was the other person they had.
He was the runner-up, right?
No, I
and
think
look how he did.
I think we really lucked out that he went the way that he did, because I think had he been the Conservative leader, I think that we would have been in more serious trouble than we were.
So let's talk about Maxime Bernier and the People's Party for the 2 more minutes they deserve, if that.
Sure.
2 more minutes than they deserve. Let me correct that. So he comes into the election with a disproportionate amount of coverage, gets into the debates because of technicalities, it seemed like. Trudeau had set up this debate commission where if you met 2 of 3 criteria, you can get on. Mm-hmm. And luckily, Bernier knew through Reddit, I guess, someone in every constituency and got a candidate in every constituency. So that ticked one box.
Right.
He seemed to have a reasonable chance according to one poll in 2 ridings. So they're like, all right, maybe you're a legit party. And then he makes a mockery of himself, gets 2% of the vote nationwide, and loses his own seat.
Yeah. So sweet.
After he spent most of the election talking about immigration in a way that Canadians, I think, strongly reject it. Like, Canadians are mostly fine with our immigration system. Like, people don't know how many immigrants we take in a year. Most people are like, it's probably fine, a little bit more, a little bit less, whatever.
Yeah, Canada is huge, and there's almost no people in it. It's largely uninhabitable, but like, if people wanted to live, they could. There's lots of space.
Yeah, it's also just hard to get to, too, which keeps the illegal immigration down to a large amount. And that's part of the reason why I think that the anti-immigration message hasn't taken off the way it has in the US or in European countries is Canada's just way too isolated. You actually have to go through the proper process and get a plane ticket and everything to come here. And at that point, the government's already checking. You just don't have people streaming across the border the way you do in the States or in Europe. And that keeps the, I think, reactionary elements suppressed a lot more.
And I think there was, before the election, this fear among conservatives that, or maybe hope among progressives, that the People's Party would steal a bunch of votes and split the vote down every riding, and Liberals would have an easy win. That didn't happen because the People's Party failed to come through. I think an analysis showed if all of their votes had gone to the Conservatives, which is not something that would necessarily happen, a bunch of people would stay home or vote Green because voters are weird, it turns out, or maybe NDP, people are really weird. The Conservatives might have only picked up like 3 or 4 more seats, not really making a difference. So it was all for nothing, but we spent so long talking about this party. Why?
I think it's pretty salacious. I mean, I found anything I read about them, I found fairly frightening. And I think, and fear gets clicks.
Yeah. The media loves drama, and in an election that often didn't have much of it, except when it really had a lot of it for a few days, it was the sort of thing the media could take and make headlines with for filler.
So People's Party are dead, they're gone, they're never coming back. Maxime Bernier's political career is over, pour a little out for that. Let's move to one of the other small parties out of this election, the Green Party. They were coming in on this wave of enthusiasm. The stories through the summer and the spring were, is this the breakthrough? Will we see a caucus of 10, 15, 30 Green MPs coming through and really shaking things up in Canadian politics? And in the end, they got 3.
Best result ever.
Which was, they grew their caucus by 50%. It's tripled what they elected last time. It's the best vote share Elizabeth May has gotten since 2008. It turned out this is actually the first election that Elizabeth May has picked up a greater vote share than the previous. She'd been declining the Green vote share as leader in 2008, 11, 15. And then this year finally got up to 7% and 3 seats. What are your thoughts on what this attempt, the failing of the Green wave? Or do you think it failed?
I mean, I'm torn about the Green Party a little bit because I'm from Vancouver Island, which is of course a Green stronghold. And when I'm back home, I see that and I see how passionate people are about the party, and I am torn on it because I am a NDP supporter, and I don't fully understand why they're separate parties necessarily, but I do see the support locally that on Vancouver Island that they have, and they have for Andrew Weaver, and people are really passionate about the work and their chosen representatives. And I like that people have the opportunity to vote for an individual that they like. So most people that in Vancouver Island were not voting for Elizabeth May. They're voting, in their riding for this person that they want to represent them. But on the other hand, there was so many ads running in Vancouver Island about basically kind of how center Green is, and all of Elizabeth's kind of equivocation on whether or not she would insist that her representatives were pro-choice, like that kind of gray language where she hadn't said that she wouldn't, but I mean, her answer was very diplomatic, but not what anyone wants to hear, particularly on that issue.
Yeah, I don't have much to disagree with there. And I think that equivocation really hurt the Green Party a lot because they came in with a huge amount of momentum. They posted some really good fundraising numbers in the quarter leading up to the election. Everything looked like it was going to do well for the Greens, except once they actually started campaigning, and then everybody took a big step back when the Greens started equivocating on stuff. They had questions about whether or not separatists were welcome in their party, which anyone who's been around politics for 5 minutes should know that's not something you equivocate on.
Quebec separatists, to be clear. We
Yeah,
don't
we're
know the
not-
answer about Alberta separatists yet.
Right.
Actually, this is the Green Party. We should probably be asked about Cascadia separatists, too.
And like the Greens kicked off the election with what they thought were going to be a bunch of scoop stories on the NDP. They're like, look, Pierre Nantel, this Quebec MP, he's quitting the NDP. He's going to run for the Greens. That's a sign of our momentum. Here's these 14 people in the Maritimes who are going to switch from the NDP to the Greens. So we're stealing their momentum. And it's like the NDP just knows all of their own skeletons so well that they're like, oh, actually, Pierre Nantel's kind of very racist. Like, he said all these things about Jagmeet Singh that you should probably wonder about.
And then the separatism thing, that was Pierre Nantel who sparked that whole debate.
And then it turned out the 14 people named in Quebec didn't actually agree that they were all going to the Greens. And some were like, we'll go to the provincial Greens, but we still support the federal NDP.
Most of them weren't even doing that. It was just one guy who basically added 14 names to a list that he circulated.
And then no one fact-checked the story. So it was just a bunch of stories that looked like they were going to be good for the Greens, but then just crashed against them on the like slightest blowing on that house of cards, I guess. I'm mixing metaphors. And it just, I think it showed a political naivety and a like inability to do politics at the level they needed to do to even compete with the NDP, who were in a bad situation. They had no money and not much goodwill going into that election, and they're just like, go away, you're a joke.
It has felt like for the length of time that they have been a national presence that you would want to see it be more significant at this point.
Exactly. They haven't professionalized despite having an MP in Ottawa for 2 years now. And they really should. Or sorry, not 2 years, 2 terms. And the Flyers that they keep dragging up for some reason. No one should be surprised that attack ads are a thing in an election. You should just be prepared for them rather than talking about how unfair it is that someone's running an attack ad.
And that's what you're talking about on Vancouver Island, where, Elizabeth May is like, their NDP threw out all their resources into stopping us on the island. And it's like, the NDP didn't have that many resources, but they did definitely put some into making sure they held, seats like Victoria that went from Murray Rankin, a long respected MP, to it's now held by Laurel Collins, the former city councillor there. But the NDP was like, we're not losing ground, at least there. And, you can't, like Scott says, politics gets dirty, and it's annoying when the team I like plays a little dirtier. But if you're in this game, you got to be a big kid.
Well, and I think the equivocation is so interesting because you mentioned that they have such a small presence. So they're not going to be the national leading party. So I don't think you have to walk quite as safe a line because you're not going to be held to the highest standard. So no one, and it's a very diplomatic answer, and I think true that, yes, you want people to be open and free to have whatever beliefs they have, but I'm going to connect much more, and everyone is going to connect more to, and this comes up in comedy a lot. It's partly why I struggle in stand-up comedy, because absolutes are funnier than gray area. Most things are gray to me. But, if I make a statement like, riding the bus is the worst, people connect and you're like, oh, great, I'm on board with the premise, why? Or riding the bus is the best. You're like, oh, great, okay, why? But if I said it's an affordable option, but sometimes it'd be crowded, sometimes it smells bad or whatever. That's not, no, it was like, who cares? And that's what all Green Party responses are like, yeah, it's true that individuals have agency and they should be allowed to think whatever they want and you're not going to force them to think, blah, blah, blah. But also, how do you feel about abortion? Come out strong.
Well, and we saw that during the debates, too. I think Elizabeth May, when I watched it, did really well, but it's because I'm a nerd who likes listening to wonky discussions, and she brought that on the climate. But Jagmeet Singh, like you said, they ran on a very similar, there were differences in their climate policy, but he could just say, we need to tax the rich and clean up the environment.
That's it. But he's not going to win. So he can say as many, hey, first day, we're doing this. Because there's not going to be a first day.
Yeah. He planned on, bringing in national pharmacare by the end of this year.
Right.
That was a crazy promise.
Sure. But he doesn't have to fulfill on it. But I like that. I still am connecting with him. Be like, great, I like these ideals, though. And it's like, okay.
Well, I think it's because we're all very used to being disappointed in the compromises that you accept with politics. So you know that whatever they say, it's going to be twice as long and half as good. So you're like, at least start, twice as big and half as time. So when I'm disappointed, we're where we should have been anyway.
That's probably although that equivocation, well, not equivocation, but going into the wanty nerdy details is probably why the Greens actually do fairly well among high educated voters. But I think the other big problem for them is with all of that equivocation, they were used to being in a situation where they got favorable media coverage and nobody really asked them about the details too much. And when this election started, there was already talk, it's going to be minority government. Maybe the Greens will even be holding the balance of power. And then suddenly everyone was very interested in what they would do in all of these situations. And they didn't have a good answer prepared for them, or they'd hum and haw, or they'd just not be able to stand up to the scrutiny. And that really cost them.
And so now the question is, who takes over? Because in the last week, Elizabeth May announced she's stepped down as leader, effective immediately. I think this was Tuesday. She's going to stick on as House leader. So in Parliament, she'll be the leader of the three who represents them. That makes sense. And there'll be an interim leader of the party, Joanne Robertson, who I think used to be involved in the Vancouver Greens and then the BC Greens, and now is out east because all politics, small party people get around. And now there's going to be a leadership race with the decision by October 2020. Which I realized slightly after overlaps with the BC Greens leadership race because they're deciding on a new leader in June. So if you're a member of the BC Green and the Green movement in this province, you're about to get a lot of fundraising emails, and maybe people are going to start asking you to lead one of their two parties because they're going to need talent, because leadership races suck up volunteers and resources and talent, and this probably isn't good for both of them to be running at the same time.
Really going to cut into those people's indoor rock climbing time.
Maybe they can discuss, leadership potential at Whole Foods and things like that.
Sure.
All the standard stereotypes. Mm-hmm. And now the question becomes, who's going to take over either of these parties? At the provincial level, they're both caucuses of three, right? So you have Adam Olsen and Sonia Furstenau, who have both proven themselves reasonable in the BC legislature, and either could be a natural choice for that leader, or it could be someone from outside the legislature. And the same goes for Ottawa, except the two other MLA or MPs for the federal Greens are really unknown. There's Paul Manley, who used to be a New Democrat until they kicked him out for being too pro-Palestine, I think. Or he didn't toe the line on Israel enough. And so he's like, I'm leaving you, I'm joining the Greens. And the MP for Fredericton, who's named Jacinda.
I'm also blanking on that at the moment too. Yeah,
How
she's brand
embarrassing for you.
But she's new, and a lot of people have a lot of respect for her out in Fredericton, from what I hear.
Jenica Atwin.
Yes. I like to think it was the New Zealand's prime minister with a very similar name.
That's Jacinda Ardwell. I'm just going to these up and throwing you off.
Yeah. So she might make a good leader, but at the same time, first-time MPs, hit and miss on that. And like you said, Paul Manley has questions in his past that may or may not be what the Green Party wants to spend the next election litigating.
Well, in either case, the Greens are going to go, or if they choose someone else, the Greens taking on a new leader is a good chance to get some attention, but that's also going to be a new leader who then has to work from zero in a minority parliament when an election could happen at any time. So they need to build up the party nationwide. They need to find fundraising. They need to find candidates who are ready for the next election. All of that very quickly. This was kind of the issue Jagmeet Singh ran into when he took over the party because the NDP was in a very bad state. There, it had also atrophied because Tom Mulcair kind of dragged his feet for a while, and he's like, I don't know if I need to stick around or go. And finally, the party members were like, fuck off. Literally with like knives at a convention, figuratively. And so the NDP had that trouble, and then we saw it took Jagmeet 2 years to get into Parliament, and then really until the election before Canadians actually stood up and noticed him and gave him a chance.
Though in his case, he could have gotten into Parliament a lot quicker. They just needed to ask someone in a safe seat to resign, which brings me to the Greens and Elizabeth May. She said she's going to stick around, but if it's not one of the two MPs that ends up taking over, they really need to get someone into Parliament for that. And the safest seat is Saanich Gulf Islands, where Elizabeth May represents. So she really should consider leaving Parliament if the Green Party selects a leader that's not an MP.
But then she can't be speaker.
I think it's really tough too, because one of the things that I would hear when I was on Vancouver Island is that one of the pieces of trust that Greens has built is that Elizabeth May has been there for 2 terms now, and so they felt like she has some experience that they weren't seeing from Jagmeet, which I always thought was kind of a cop out. Like, oh, he's not experienced yet. I'd be like, he's fine, whatever. But like, I mean, I guess it's true, but
well, and where it comes down is I think Elizabeth May actually did a ton of work in her constituency, and the people she met with love her. Like, she is a fabulously nice human being. I sat for 4 hours on a plane with her randomly when, like, you get the Vancouver to Ottawa flights. Eventually, you're going to sit beside a politician. And it's probably going to be like a Green or New Democrat, because the other ones will go in business class, I assume. But, like, halfway through that flight, I didn't want to pay for a pop that I didn't realize wasn't included in my meal. She's like, oh, I'll get you that. And I'm like, you don't have to do that, Elizabeth May. But I have to put it in here now because she's retiring as leader. But the other fun anecdotes that are so peak Green are, she wouldn't touch the receipt that came out of the credit card machine because those chemicals are carcinogenic. Never minding that flying is also carcinogenic because you go high enough that you get cosmic rays that are...
You can't.
She also brought her own salt shaker and lime for the Caesar she made on the plane.
All right, I like that. I like this business. I like this.
Because then you don't know what chemicals have touched the lime they put in your drink.
Wow.
But genuinely nice human being. So I always feel a little bad telling those stories because I'm like, I'm not trying to make fun of her because she was nice and kind, but it's so easy.
Too sweet. You're like, you can't be.
And so she's like really good at that constituency level stuff, but I don't know that she was good as leader, actually. And that kind of, I think, showed during the campaign. And it's kind of why the Greens fizzled. And it's why they've not really grown the way they possibly could have under a different leader. Mm-hmm. And I've heard that frustration from Green members as well, who talk about a desire to see more than the Elizabeth May show. But now that there's a caucus of 3, hopefully they'll have that.
Hopefully. Just one thing before we move on, because we do need to hit up the other parties pretty soon, is this was supposed to be the climate change election. Carbon taxes featured somewhat heavily, but why weren't the Greens able to take their signature issue and leverage it?
So people wanted a climate plan, especially here in BC. Why do you think people weren't receptive enough to?
I think federally it doesn't get, I think the coasts really like it, but I don't know necessarily if the entire country is as fervent for that plan as we sitting here feel like they are. Because I think in Vancouver, I think it's just a little more top of mind. And certainly when I tour, and if anywhere I'm in the interior or in the middle, that they don't like that very much. They don't like it as much.
You get up there and make the climate change deniers or just the flat earthers, and the room is silent.
Yeah, my classic climate change or the flat earthers denier bit that I'm hanging my hat on. So I think that's a piece of it.
Well, and I think the Liberals did manage to some extent to frame it in that you can have our mediocre, decent climate change plan, one of the better ones, or you can have nothing and be really afraid of nothing because the world is on fire. And so the progressives had to decide, do we stick with... It's such a change, the way the Liberals campaigned in 2015 versus this year. And you can tell the scandals that had built up, but just remember 2015, remember Justin Trudeau running around, running the grouse grind, going...
Well, he did that this year too.
Yeah, but it wasn't like a signature, because 2015 was like him canoeing, him running the grouse grind, him bragging about like, we can bring hope back. Do you remember hope? And then Sunny Ways.
Yeah, it's so cute. Like everyone didn't know that he was in the Liberal Party. Like, we like him so much. We're like, he's still, you know how it worked, right? Like, I think Justin Trudeau as an individual, maybe, I don't know the man, maybe he really does want election reform. But the idea that the Liberal Party was going to do that is bananas.
I've heard the best rumors about his personal view on electoral reform is he's really into ranked ballots. He likes the idea you get into your ballot box, you get to choose rank 1, 2, 3, 4 of all the parties, And, if the number ones don't get the most,
I like that too, but also I'm the kind of person that at a restaurant is like, what do you get? Should we share? I'll get to because I can't decide.
I'm just sure it's a coincidence that happens to benefit the Liberal Party more than anyone else.
Or at least they think it will, because we did do ranked ballots once in BC when there was a Conservative Party and what I think it was called a Liberal Party at the time, and they're like, we can't have the CCF, the Socialists, the precursor to the NDP, come in, so we'll do ranked ballots. And everyone put the new upstart Social Credit second. The Conservatives were like, all right, we don't want the Liberals because we hate them, so Conservative, Social Credit. And Liberals went Conservative, Social Credit. And Social Credit won a majority out of nowhere. And then they went, well, this is a stupid system. Bye. We'll just keep our majority for, I think it was 30 years, and then the NDP had one little term, and then they got another 30 years. And that's BC politics in a
Oh yeah,
snap.
keep the socialists out. It explains a huge amount of BC political history.
So, what is Justin Trudeau's core, I think, has always been this enigma, because there's the show he puts on, which is very progressive, especially during the elections. But then I think, for me personally, the blackface is almost like the hint at what's under there. It's not that he's a raging racist, but he's just this
he's just a rich kid. He's just a rich white kid, and he's just rich white kid stuff of the era of which he was born. It's the same reason that he has an indigenous tattoo. It's this, if he was born today and grew up now, it would be different stuff. And
it's why he, came onto the political career by boxing with Patrick Brazeau and then shaving his head as a bet. Patrick Brazeau, the conservative indigenous senator, who he was then like, I'll shave your ceremonial hair off. That's how Trudeau started, and we didn't really notice. Kid. We didn't notice then. How is the blackface thing actually surprising to anyone?
Was it?
Maybe not. So I think we've touched on the Greens, the People's Party, the Liberals plenty. Do we want to talk about the Conservatives? Other than, we talked about Scheer, but why didn't Scheer break through? Was he just too bland and creepy?
Kind of, yes. He's definitely bland and a little creepy. Remember that video he did just after he got elected leader, where he's walking through a park very awkwardly in the most dad outfit possible? He's managed to shave a little bit of that off, but by and large, he's still that somewhat awkward guy. But more importantly, his entire political instinct is just to play to the base. That was their entire campaign. They never really did much to reach outside of the core 30 to 35% that was going to show up to vote for them anyway. And, well, unsurprisingly, they didn't manage to convince anyone outside of that 30% to go up and vote.
When I started doing stand-up comedy, I'd go into comedy clubs, and I would notice that even the base is the worst, the hackiest, most annoying, most ill-thought-out joke, if it was about sex, would just kill. And I'd be like, because we do with the naked, and I was so jealous because I did not have any sex jokes because I did not have any sex. I didn't know it's I had no point of reference for that. So, and I feel that is similar to Andrew Scheer.
Well, he has 5 kids, so
probably... not Andrew Scheer trying to go out and talk about jobs. Having never had one of those?
He was almost an insurance salesman, but it turns out he wasn't.
Yeah, he was just the tip of an insurance. But if that's really, if that's the core, I care about jobs, I care about the working man, I don't know, maybe get a callus, or I don't know, do a job ever.
But people voted for Trudeau. I guess he had actually taught.
Yeah, but also...
would anyone have voted for Trudeau if his name wasn't Trudeau?
But that's also... And his is not... His argument, or his platform isn't quite as, working, get back to job. His is more tax. We're not going to take your tax money as much, or whatever. Middle classy, house and a boat. You deserve it.
And so on this playing to the base argument, there's the debate going on. I know, Scott, you want to see a Conservative Party. Well, I actually want to see a Conservative Party that is more moderate, has a climate plan, and tries to appeal outside just like that blue center of Alberta, Saskatchewan, interior BC, Manitoba. On the other side, though, I've seen some polling out from ECOS, and Frank Graves, the head of ECOS, has put this out there, that the Conservatives are really good at winning this end of the spectrum that's called like ordered. And so you have like the people who really like order and society, think Jordan Peterson. And then you have the people who are really open and like multiculturalism and immigration and other things. Think the brand Trudeau tries to sell. And the Conservatives won that open ordered side. They won those people who like structure. And that portion of the Canadian electorate is about 35% of the population, according to Frank Graves. And to get a majority government in Canada, you need around 40% of the vote in the right places, but that can usually do it. Scheer got 34% of the vote. There's an argument that, he just needed to break through a little bit more in Toronto, the 905, where Doug Ford actually did pretty well, pick up a couple extra seats in Quebec again, and he'd be in a much different situation. He wasn't that far off. He won the popular vote as much as it was. So the Conservatives have this dilemma. Do we just keep doubling down, but double down harder with someone who's better at selling that? Or do they actually try and appeal to the moderate or the red Tories, the Liberals who are a bit more fiscally conservative?
If their entire plan is centered around the NDP splitting off the Liberal vote enough that they can break through, it's not a great plan. They need luck to win under that strategy, and they'd be much better off trying to just win without the luck.
It's usually a good strategy to try to do the thing without the luck rather than relying on the luck.
Exactly. And there's a lot of talk around that order survey about whether or not this means they can move or have to stay with the base. But those people are going to vote Conservative anyway. That's locked in. It takes a lot to split the Conservatives apart on that. 90s Western discontent level of anger within the party on that. So they can move quite a bit, and those people will come with them. They may grudgingly do it, but they will vote nonetheless. So you can absolutely move to the center, pull in more people, and try and do what Mulroney did, and he actually won a majority of the vote, over 50%. Him and Diefenbaker are the only two prime ministers since World War II to do that. They're both conservatives. Like, it can be done. They just have to try and do it well, and they haven't.
Just one point on the order versus open bit. The one thing that makes me really proud to be a Canadian and someone who identifies as a much more open cosmopolitan worldview is that the US has about 45% of its population in the ordered camp versus Canada's only 35%. So I think a lot of the dysfunction you can see down there, maybe in Britain, can be explained by that versus we might be a slightly more insulated by only having a third who want fascism. Light. Well, I think that covers quite a bit of those parties. Do we want to... Well, let's just talk about Scheer's leadership then, because the news this week was Scheer had this caucus decision. They had a vote to decide whether they would trigger a leadership review, and it would take a fifth of his caucus voting, a fifth of the MPs, 20%, saying,
well, actually,
let's ask the question.
Well, first they had to agree to adopt the Reform Act provisions, which required 50%.
This is the really wonky part of the podcast.
So they needed to get 50, then 20 to do it. He didn't do it. They still had a 7-hour meeting, though, so there was clearly some angry words going between that.
Maybe they just had a party, as the Conservative caucus is known for. Very lively, spirited bunch, just having a bunch of beers and saying, "Well, how's it going?"
Probably not.
Maybe they watched all of the Lord of the Rings.
Well, that would take 12 hours. So
okay.
Milk's on me, boys.
So there seems to be discontent in the party, but not so much that they want to kick him out right away. What does Scheer need to do to save his job? Like if you were in this situation where you got had a couple bad shows go on, and you're like, I want to keep doing comedy though. What do you do to change course on that? If you're also the leader of the right-wing party of Canada.
Rhetorical question.
I was like, getting a little confused by the metaphor. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would. It seems like it would appeal to that order side. You think of changing things right now would be chaos.
Because I've heard the suggestion that if Scheer had just been willing to go to say a pride parade once and just put those how uncomfortable is he really with gay people questions to bed at least a little bit, he could have satisfied a few more Toronto Conservatives and then picked up a few more seats. So does Scheer need to just go to a pride parade, maybe put on drag
I mean,
It
like,
wouldn't
he
hurt.
100% needs to do that. I don't know about for vote, I don't care.
Yeah.
But, like, just as a human being, he
Just for the
for
Beavers.
sure needs to.
It probably wouldn't hurt at this point. But yeah, so far he's been just doubling down on everything. And from what I've seen, that's generating is more discontent within the party, because it's looking like he hasn't learned any lessons from the campaign at all. So when the vote comes around at their April convention, he's going to be in for a tough ride on that.
Well, and now let's just finish off with a few more thoughts, or finish this bit on with a few more thoughts on the NDP. So they went in looking like they were facing electoral wipeout. Singh kind of turned that around, did really well in the debates. At one point, it was like, oh, we're going to come out with as many seats as we went in. Things won't be that bad. And then it was like, they split the difference. And it was like, well, they could have done worse, but they were kind of hoping to do better. Like, you said you're an NDP supporter. Were you happy with the results?
I mean,
24 seats.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily about the numbers. I was happy about the campaign. I was happy about, I'm optimistic for the future of, like, now. It did feel very much like it felt like an introduction to for the whole country, for people who were not already on board with Jagmeet or weren't already following. I feel optimistic about sort of the next time, because this felt, I mean, it was almost embarrassing to be like, is Canada ready for, like, oh, get out of here, like, for real, this is what we're going to do in 2020?
The answer is no, because we have a prime minister who's done blackface.
Totally. We're like 100% not ready, which is humiliating.
Actually, we are ready for a prime minister who wears a turban, but he has to be white still.
Yeah. Yeah. But so then it felt like, what I'm optimistic about is maybe we could get all of the "Are we ready?" articles out of our system this time, so that the next time we're starting from, this is an established person in federal politics, and we can just start from, hey, this person is ready, we're ready.
Yeah, I think it took Jack Layton 2 or 3 elections to really get the recognition and be won over to Canadians.
Yeah, and that's just a white dude that rides a bike. They're like, what?
In the first election, they nicknamed him Taliban Jack, because
Forgot about that.
this is quite a while ago, but it was like around the Iraq or the Afghanistan wartime, and he was like trying to, or he'd argued at one point, you know, maybe we should be negotiating a peace in Afghanistan rather than like committing to perpetual military interventions there. And people are like, you want to negotiate with the Taliban Jack? I was like, anyone who tells you the discourse is getting worse is just like not paying attention. It's just always been bad. All elections are dirty and exhausting.
It is it does feel like the first time since Jack Layton that NDP has had has a leader with leadership qualities and charisma, and that unites any kind of collective.
Well, I slightly disagree on that. The problem is that version of Tom Mulcair never left question period.
Yeah, Tom Mulcair in the House as like a parliamentarian
Sure.
is pretty good.
Sure.
Tom Mulcair on the campaign trail with a team that was like, you should smile and just like not be angry.
Yeah.
It was creepy and made everyone
No, we
feel
liked
uncomfortable.
we liked Andrew Tom Mulcair. Andrew Tom Mulcair just disappeared, and he lost as a result.
I'm pretty dumb. As I want a figurehead as the leader. Like, that's great. That's great news that he is that. But it's not important to me as the top guy. It's important to me as the guy behind the guy. I want the rest of the party to be that. Great. But, like, that's the only thing I like about Trudeau's eye. Show up at a parade. Put your pretty face out there and say that you like gay people. Great. Get out here. Be among us. That matters to me. It matters to me culturally. It matters to me politically. And embarrassingly, it matters to me to be, like, smug to Americans and be like, look at our guy.
No, it's a top Canadian pastime.
Yeah. But that stuff is important in federal politics. And so it was like, it's embarrassing, I thought, for Montclair to be like, yeah, it's great. It's great that you're a good politician. How would I know that? Huh?
Yeah, no one watches question period.
Yeah.
Even most of the MPs aren't there.
Yeah.
So.
And that's the thing that I like about Jagmeet. It was like, I have been following him since he was in GQ in 2015 because I give a shit about men's fashion.
Well, what was Trudeau's thing? He wasn't he in Vogue or Vanity Fair and did like Rolling
Oh, no, he's
Stone?
not my type.
Those other ones.
So the one thing I will say on the NDP is that Singh's a really good campaigner. He showed that in the leadership race. He won on the first ballot and did a good job in this campaign. The problem for the NDP is being what happens between the campaign. They went into this campaign with not a great organization in place, really low on the fundraising, and that hurt them. They weren't able to exploit the opportunities that having a good leader opened up during the campaign, because they just didn't have the resources to put into that. And what I'm going to be watching for isn't what the leader's doing, in question period or when he's touring the country. It's, are the NDP actually getting the fundraising numbers they need to run another election in 2 years? And are they building the organization, or will it atrophy between elections like it happened last time?
I think the one thing that's going to be different now than in the past 4 years, number one, they're not coming out of an election demoralized and with a leader who's like not clear about whether he actually wants the job. Singh clearly wants the job, and the party seems to want him to want the job. So that's good. I even know a bunch of people who are like, I'm joining the party after the election. I'm like, it'd be great if you had done that like 2 months before the election. That's when they actually appreciate it. Of course, they take out loans so they can deal with that. Do support the political party you want. The other thing that's going to happen is we're in a minority situation. So there's always that threat of an election, and that makes the NDP more relevant than the last 4 years. Like, they ask some good questions in committee, but, no one watches question period, and no one watches the committees and places where MPs actually can sometimes make a difference. They're smart people in the caucus. Hopefully they can use the power they now have, because like the Justice Committee is now not dominated by the Liberals. So all those scandals they were able to just push out. Now if the Conservatives, Bloc and NDP team up, they can bring those back. They could reopen the SNC debate and recall witnesses and make these stories come back. And that can help them get some prominence, get in the news. Jagmeet Singh's in Parliament since January, February, so he can at least be a national presence. His weird tour before that didn't seem to stick, so being near the press corps also helps. So I think it is more optimistic for them now than 4 years ago, but it could still all peter out because it's really expensive to run an election.
I was about to say that fundraising piece you mentioned is interesting, because also NDP supporters don't have any money. Yeah. That's kind of why we like them. Like, hey,
it was such a different time when Chrétien instituted a per vote subsidy and parties were just given money by how many votes they got.
Yeah. I know that we're very close to wrapping up, and I'm sure that you have final thoughts. So I don't want to step on those, but I did want to mention that at the end, when everything and all the dust is settled at the end of the election, Canada still ranked, we're 57th for female representation in government. Seems low. This is not great.
I think we just set a record where we got to like 24%. I want to say somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think it's the best parliament ever, which isn't great.
Nope.
And I don't know what the diversity in terms of race and LGBTQ. I know the NDP did run the most diverse slate, half women, the most people of color.
Yeah, I think like 4 LGBTQ members, I think, and they're all cisgender white men, I believe. But don't quote me on that, because we already covered. I'm pretty dumb. Yeah, like 10 Indigenous individuals, 4 of which are women. I'm so torn on advocating for these things, because I don't want to run, and I don't know why anyone would. And I wouldn't wish this on any women or anyone else. But I also want them to. So,
It's definitely tough. That's one thing that electoral reform kind of held a promise of, is it can make it easier. And something, if Canada adopted a system like New Zealand, mixed member proportional, one thing New Zealand did is they set aside seats for the Maori people. The Indigenous people of New Zealand have guaranteed representation. And there are Indigenous groups that have advocated that would be a good model for Canada. Or there's even been an argument that there should be, like we have the House of Commons and the Senate, there could also be like a third House of First Nations where they have their own review of bills from their perspective, which would be a novel, interesting. I don't know what it would do to the ability to pass laws, but it would be interesting from a political watching point of view. Do you think our politics is still too toxic for women, people of color to get involved? Or are people too sexist and racist to vote for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bar's pretty high. I think that, I think also just there's an element of privilege, as you mentioned, in order to have the time and the space to do something like a campaign and to exist in those spaces. And I think, and we did see also, I mean, even the conversation, we spend like we spent 5 minutes talking about how nice Elizabeth May is, and then how that's not something that we want in a leader. It is a conversation to have like that is when you see it with how many women are running for national leadership in America. That is conversations that you have do they have leadership qualities? Are they women? We're like, ugh.
Well, and it was, I think 5 years ago, half the premiers in Canada were women, and now only the premier of the Northwest Territories is a woman, and the only federal party leader who is a woman stepped down. The interim one is also a woman. So we're not totally, there are still women involved in politics, but there's a good chance we could have no women leaders at the federal level, and that becomes a huge issue for representation and like inspiring the next generation to come up.
You don't have the answers.
That's
We've already
not
covered them.
optimistic.
Very dumb.
Yeah, well, we could easily spend another hour talking about all of these issues and what we're expecting to see in the next 2 to 4 years of Parliament, but fortunately we're coming up on time. But before we go, Katie-Ellen, is there anything you want to plug and tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the Vancouver Podcast? Is that what we're on? Yeah, Vancouver Podcast. I will be back here again tomorrow at 3:30 for the Fear of Science mashup with This is Van Color. Be a great show. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Ms. Katie-Ellen on both of those. And I perform locally around town as a stand-up comedian. I have an album that'll be dropping in February 2020 that I just wrapped, and I'll be appearing at the JFL Northwest Festival with my group, The Lady Show, where we do we put the joy in feminist killjoy.
And that has been Politicos. Thanks to VanPodFest for hosting us. Thank you to Katie-Ellen Humphries for joining us today. Thank you to everyone who came out and our patrons who helped support the show and made it an excellent 3 years. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, hey.
Let's go get beer.